Okay, so I think we're good to start. Hello, everyone. My name is Omar Azavi, and I'm so incredibly excited to introduce you to the Faith and Martyrdom 2 event. Whether you're a faith or not, or find yourself somewhere in between, we are so excited to have you here today. It's been an incredibly eventful year, so I'm gracious that you have made the time to take part in our event. Today, you'll join a much needed conversation guided by three of our gracious guest speakers. For everyone joining us on YouTube Live, please note that there is a moderate delay in the streaming service, and as such, we may need to account for it during our interactive activities. So I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are on Treaty 7 territory, the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Nations, including Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai, the Tsuut'ina Nation, and Stoney Nakoda First Nations. We acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. So now, before we get too formal, I want to start by ushering in a brief little icebreaker. I'll ask you all a series of questions that vary in format, and using Poll EV, I encourage you all to participate to test what you know. Once again, we apologize for any delay we experience. As we all know, we live in the virtual world, and we're at the mercy of our computers, so we're grateful for your patience. So head to pollev.com, enter user the common den 728 as you can see on screen, and all answers are anonymous, so no need to enter a name. Okay, so starting with our first question, I'll start easy, don't worry, but what are you hoping to learn today? So just submit your answers, don't worry, it's anonymous, so no one will judge. All very important, yeah, right. Yeah, these are all, really great answers, and we hope to, share some insight and that everyone can leave learning about what they wish to come to learn about. So that's amazing. Okay, thanks everyone so much for that. So now, what does humanity mean to you? And I understand that this is a very personal question, and that, there's a lot of ways to interpret it. So, we're excited to see all the different answers. Yeah, and once again, all some really great answers. Thank you everyone so much for participating. So moving away from the abstract a little bit, our next question is, and I apologize for the typo on screen, what religion holds more than 2.2 billion followers? Once again, billion. Otherwise, this whole question was gonna have lots and lots of answers. Okay, so believes that we're having a technical difficulty on that question, but answer is Christianity. So now our next question is, in what nations do the Uyghurs occupy? So you can click around on the map and see if you can get it right. Okay, amazing. Now maybe if we can move on to our final question. Thank you all again so much for participating. This has really been amazing. So now our final question. What Islamic movement marked the revival of Islam in the region of Punjab, India? So is it A, the Sunnis, B, the Shias, C, the Ahmadiyya, D, Sufism, or E, none of the above? And I'm loving to see the answers coming in already. So it looks like people have been joining us on the Zoom as well, which is amazing. And I'm really excited to have this event for everyone today. And once again, everyone, thank you so much for joining us on the icebreaker, because it's really great to get everyone involved in the start. And we're hoping that at the end of the event and after the guest speakers come to talk, that we can all reflect on these questions, and hopefully every person can leave this event feeling to know that they know a little bit more about all of this. So thank you guys all so much.
My name is Babar, and I am Uyghur.
My name is Usman Mahmood, and I am a practicing lawyer here in Calgary.
So, tell me about the state of persecution in your community.
The Uyghurs are facing a genocide right now. The Communist Party of China has carried out mass human rights atrocities in East Turkestan, what they call the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. The Uyghurs of East Turkestan are facing forced labor. They're facing child separation and family separation. And there are over 3 million Uyghurs in camps right now designed to eradicate our culture. The Canadian Parliament has already called this a genocide, and the United States government has officially designated one as well.
I belong to the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, which is one of the most persecuted communities in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and some other countries around the world. Ahmadis have been persecuted in Pakistan for a very long time. Ahmadis were being persecuted in 50s and then in 70s and 80s, and it hasn't stopped since then. Many Ahmadis are to lose their lives. The most worrying element is that the government was fully involved in such persecution and did not prosecute the persecutors and people who created such intolerant societies.
One of the things that the common denominator has noted while working with various faith groups from backgrounds in many ways similar to yours is almost a blackout from the media, from nations that have the power to help. Why do you think that this apathy exists?
I think one of the reasons the apathy or the mainstream doesn't know about what's happening to the Uyghurs today is because there's a lot going on and it's hard for people to pay attention to everything at once. There's an element of fatigue, but there's also an element of influence. China has a lot of money and a lot of countries that work with China, whether through trade deals or partnerships, and that money talks. It causes countries to remain silent, like Muslim nations who partner with China. It causes organizations to think twice about speaking out in fear of retaliation or retribution. And we're seeing even today that people who do speak out, organizations and nations that do say something, are met with retributions. And I think that that can be one of the biggest reasons why it's not entering the mainstream as it should.
It's written in the constitution that Ahmadis cannot practice their faith. Therefore, the media, as we all know, in countries such as Pakistan, is fully controlled by the government and other agencies. Therefore, the media does not give the opportunity to Ahmadis to have a healthy debate or a conversation where they can also explain their side of the story and explain they mean no harm to the country. They just want to practice their faith freely and live freely in a state that had promised its citizens freedom of expression, speech, life and liberty.
TCD is, hopefully, working towards a future where people will have the fundamental right to believe and to live in harmony, notwithstanding our differences. Do you think a time like that is even possible?
I'm not sure whether or not a time where people can live in harmony or have the fundamental right to believe without persecution is here yet. It definitely isn't here, and I'm not sure that we'll see it soon. But I do believe that, on the whole, we are getting better. I do believe that tolerance and respect and understanding have grown, but there's a lot of work to be done, and we have to remember that. And we have to remember that the effort that it took, the sacrifice that it took to get to where we are, shouldn't be forgotten, and that we will need that much effort, and we will need to sacrifice in order to see a world that we want to live in, that we want our children to grow up in, that we can be proud of leaving behind.
Although the world looks a very broken place, there certainly are very good people out there, people who want to coexist. There are communities that are working day in and day out and living in peace and harmony. It is very much possible. I can personally relate to this idea because the community that I belong to, the Ahmadi Muslim community, despite of being persecuted severely in many countries around the world, they continue to partake in all the good deeds that a community must do in order to help other fellow beings. Ahmadis support various charities across the country and across the globe, and you always find them working day in and day out for the betterment of society. And the common denominator is also a group that is working very much in the same direction that would bring us all together, and we'll all be standing on this common ground because we all share more commonalities than our differences.
Hello, everyone. My name is Omar Razavi, and I'm here today to introduce a cause near and dear to me and my colleagues' hearts. Some of you may know about us, have seen us on Instagram, or have merely just joined us for today's event. However, regardless of how you got here today, the fact of the matter is that we must not look far to see the impacts of faith-based persecution. This form of discrimination takes up many forms and hence manifests itself in many ways, whether in the form of an innocent woman in a hijab being called a terrorist, the horrifying events of the Holocaust, or a plague of the history in Canada by the unjust assimilation and cultural genocide inflicted on our beloved Indigenous brothers and sisters. While history has been marked by persecution of faiths of all kind, unfortunately, these acts against humanity are not reserved for the history books. Today, we aim to show you that the common denominator that binds all human beings is our humanity. Today, we aim to show you that it is only through understanding and an open mind that we can progress as a civilization. While we do not hold the answer to solve such a complex issue, we are excited to take the next step with you all today as we find our common denominator. I will now introduce the MC of our event, Danish Bhatti. Thank you all so much and welcome to Faith and Martyrdom 2, the lived experiences of the unheard.
Hi guys, my name's Jesse. I hope you all enjoyed that video. It was something that we're all very passionate about here at TCD, as well as the speakers that we'll have today. I'd just like to thank Omar, Usman, and Babur for taking part in that video and letting me interview them. And I'm just going to pass it on to our MC for today, Danish. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Jesse. And thank you once again, everyone. I know we've said it quite a few times, but we are definitely very grateful to have all of you joining us. Yeah, so we are the common denominator, TCD. As Omar mentioned in that video, we are fairly new, but I'm grateful to know that we do have quite an audience here with us today. That's a lot to be proud about. So yeah, to get us started here, our mission statement, there's a lot on the screen here. I'm not going to read that to you. I know you all have eyes you can read. But no, in essence, like faith-based persecution, it persists. You know, it transcends humanity. It's all over the world, and it's something that we passionately feel there is a gap that can be filled. We can't end this. So, you know, regardless of your faith or the lack thereof, the common denominator between everyone is that we are all human. All right. Yeah, sorry for the delay that we're having some technical difficulties, but regardless, so this is our executive team here with me today. I'm just gonna, as I mentioned, you please turn on your camera, give us a little wave so our YouTube audience can see your lovely faces. So to start, we have our VP Internal, Janice. Perfect. Next, we have our VP Communications, which you've already met, and that is Jesse. Beautiful. Next, we have Sophia. She's actually serving as the vice president of this year and has done a lot to help make this event possible. Hey, Sophie. Awesome. Next, we have Manib. He is the founder and the president of this year's cycle. Hey, Manib. Beautiful. Yeah, Adam could not join us today, but he's our VP Operations and Finance. Yeah, so aside from the executive team, we do have other members that are helping a lot to make all of this possible. We've classified them as our core team, but their actual services to the common denominator are a lot bigger than that. So to start us off, we have Amni, who is the Senior Supervisor of Public Relations. Hey, Amni. And you see myself there. I am Danish. I'm the Senior Supervisor of Operations and previously served as a president. Next, Omar, who you have also met. He's a Senior Supervisor of Community Engagement. Next, we have Carl, who's actually been doing a lot of the social media work for us as a social media administrator. So a lot of the posts you see are a collaboration of him and Jesse. So, hey, Carl. And finally, we just recently actually added another member to our social media team because we feel that it's really important that this is one of those platforms that is strongly used by you know, each and every one of us. So we have Ryan here. Beautiful. Cool. Now, to kind of guide us into our past and show you what we've done, I'm going to pass it off to Amni, who's just going to tell you a little bit about what we've done in the past. Take it away, Amni.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. As Danish mentioned, my name is Amni Haykal, and I've been volunteering with TCD since 2018. I would like to first welcome and thank our audience and speakers for being here today. I'm honestly so honored to be amongst a group of people who are so passionate about such a wholesome and important cause. So I'm just going to be going through some past events that TCD has held to kind of give you a wider scope on what we're really about. So let's start with the Proof of Faith event that was done in collaboration with the East Turkestan Society of Canada that focused on the Uyghur Muslim population in the Xinjiang region of China. This is a really important and successful event. Baber, who's actually one of our speakers here today that you will all meet shortly, really helped bring this event to life, so a big thank you to him. As you can see from the slide, there was an exhibition that shared like the photos and names of those Uyghur Muslims who are missing in China. And we had a panel of speakers that came in to address the subject at hand. I would like to direct you all to the bottom left picture on the screen. This was actually a lawyer who discussed the human rights aspect of the climate in China. The event was really interactive between the speakers and the audience. In fact, a lot of the audience were asking the lawyer about, how they can locate their family members or, get into contact with them. So despite the very sad circumstances that are taking place in China, the atmosphere at the event was hopeful. I would also like to direct you to the upper right corner in the slide, which presents our social media campaign that took place during the event. We did this to showcase our support for the Uyghur Muslims, and we really wanted to reach a wide range of people through social media and raise awareness on this issue through the platform. As you can see from this slide, our guests are just walking around and really taking the time to process the situation and learn more about what's happening to the Uyghur Muslims. I'd also like to direct you to the bottom left corner where there was a table set up to showcase some of the special cultural items from the Uyghur community. Now, this slide shares our events that took place to engage the UFC students across campus. So at the top left corner, we just have a picture of our executive team at our 2020 club fair. We also had quite a few meet and greets that took place both in person and on Zoom, after the pandemic. And finally, this slide focuses on our most recent virtual event. You could say the part 1 to the Faith and Martyrdom sequel. So this event had a diverse panel of speakers that covered groups including the Yazidi population, the Rohingya and Muslims, as well as the secular humanist group. We had over 60 attendees to this event, and I mean, if you ask me, that's a pretty successful Zoom event. Our audience really took the opportunity to engage with our speakers during the question and answer session, which helped make this a very interactive and educational event. So thank you so much for listening to that. I will now pass it back to Danish to introduce our lovely speakers.
Beautiful. So yeah, as we just saw, TCD has, we've tried to do as much as we can to advocate and, be the voice for those that don't necessarily have one or aren't given the opportunity to have one. So this event is like a continuation for what we did a few months ago with Faith and Martyrdom 1. And so yeah, this is why we're all here, right? We're all here because we want to, hear the stories of these the experts, the ones that have experiences, who've heard stories from their friends, their colleagues. So first, I'd like to invite. Next slide, please. Yeah. So first, I'd like to invite Floyd. Floyd Bravo. He's currently the CEO of the Voice of the Martyrs, where he began his full-time ministry journey in 2003. Informed by the messages of the persecuted church, Floyd has remained committed to informing and supporting those experiencing such faith-based persecution. He currently works to develop international partnerships with VOMC to assist persecuted Christians. So I'd like to hand it off to Floyd now. Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, we're excited to hear what you have to tell us.
Well, thank you for this opportunity to share. You can hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you great.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, thank you. It's exciting to be with a group of people that are interested in religious freedom and freedom of religion, of belief for all. And it's good to be a part of a group of younger people that we can pass the baton on to in Canada to take this forward. But I want to represent our ministry or our mission, Voice of the Martyrs. We represent persecuted Christians globally around the world. So where Christians are persecuted, that's where you will see Voice of the Martyrs working. But I want to be clear that though our focus is on the persecuted church, in our message, we never seek to incite in any way hatred towards those who persecute Christians. We do not speak badly about other religious groups, even though at times we make no apology for calling out the more militant or radical elements of certain religions or social or political groups that attack Christians. And we strive at all times to follow the biblical teaching of Jesus that is found in Luke 6, verse 27 and 28, where he says and commands us to love our enemies and to do good to those that hate us, and to bless those who curse us, and to pray for those who abuse us or persecute us. Our own founder, Reverend Richard Wurmbrand, spent 14 years in a communist prison because of his Christian activity, and during that time, he left prison and was ransomed out of Romania, came to the West. He, of course, hated the effects of communism, but had a deep, deep love for the communists and felt that we needed to, as Christians, take the gospel to the communists. So he called us and the church in the West to pray, not only for persecuted Christians, but for persecutors as well. Now, the Voice of the Martyrs defines Christian persecution as a situation where Christians are repetitively, persistently, and systematically inflicted with grave or severe suffering or harm and deprived of or significantly threatened with the deprival of their fundamental human rights because of a difference that comes from being a Christian that the persecutor will not tolerate. And I guess you would see the commonality with other faiths. You could insert Christian and put in Muslim or Hindu and Buddhist in there, and you would have a real definition, I think, an acceptable definition of what religious persecution is. But one striking difference of the persecution between Christians and other religious groups comes in the numbers. And studies conducted by a number of groups like the Pew Research Center and the International Institute of Religious Freedom stresses that 3/4 of all religious persecution is committed against Christians, and making this a significant religious liberty violation globally today. And there is also a disproportionate number of Christians who are martyred because of their religious beliefs over that of other religions. Now, this is not to take away in any way the other groups that are suffering in the world today, and that's clear. And you will hear more about that today, and I'm excited to hear and learn more about some of the other groups and religious groups that are suffering today. And the speakers will probably recognize this as well, that the infringement of such basic human rights would include a freedom to an education, the right to own property, the right of dignity and respect, the right to life, liberty, security of the person, the freedom of religion and belief, the freedom to practice your religion, the freedom to express your religion publicly, and importantly, the freedom to change one's religion and manifest their religion or belief. So as a Christian organization, the Voice of the Martyrs, we also have a biblical basis for what we do and an understanding of human rights. And we believe that all people are created in the image of God and are therefore worthy of dignity and respect regardless of their religion or belief. And we also believe, as stated in Article 18, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that we further regard the freedom of religion and belief as the underpinning for all other rights and liberties. Now, having worked with Voice of the Martyrs for nearly 20 years, I have traveled to numerous countries, profiling cases of Christian persecution and implementing projects to assist Christians in the context of their suffering. And we wonder, why are Christians persecuted? And in 50 years of serving persecuted Christians and engaging with them personally, we see three real main reasons why we Christians are persecuted. And again, there will probably be overlaps with some of the other speakers as to why other faiths are persecuted as well. But this one here, first one, we see Christians suffer because of their identity as being a Christian. Now, for these Christians, they're born into Christian families. They are identified as Christian, whether Catholic or Protestant, and they're considered Christian by those within their social constructs. They desire to live peacefully within their communities, raise families, obtain meaningful work that will provide for their dependents, and engage in activities that enhance their communities, all the while hoping and desiring to remain free to practice their religious beliefs and customs. But sadly, many of these aspirations are denied and withheld from Christians. And in many countries, they're perceived as belonging to a Western religion, a foreign religion. They may have ties to colonialism, and therefore they're treated with suspicion. Christians as a minority then encounter discrimination and are often deprived of many of the advantages and opportunities enjoyed by those in the majority religion. We see that in a number of countries, North Korea, Pakistan, and Nigeria as a few examples of that. For example, in North Korea, if you're found out to be a Christian, this results in a life sentence to a concentration camp where you would suffer from mistreatment and hard labor, lack of food. But not only is the Christian arrested, their whole family, their entire family is arrested. And there's a means to cut off Christianity within the country. And the likelihood of Christians surviving the concentration camps due to harsh conditions is rare, and many are executed as well. In Pakistan, we heard that there are Muslim groups persecuted in Pakistan, and Christians are persecuted there as well. And in general, Christians are trapped in a cycle of poverty and poor education. And many are employed as indentured servants in brick kilns or tree nurseries, street sweepers, garbage, sewage collectors, and those type of things. And they cannot rise out of their poverty and are caught in this cycle. And many are also charged under the country's infamous blasphemy laws. And we see that because of their identity. And in Nigeria, we see with Boko Haram and a militant Fulani herdsman also attacking Christians and attacking churches as well. So in over 60 countries today, being identified as a Christian brings levels of hardship and suffering. And this is true for other faith groups, as you've heard about, but we can think of the Baha'i in Iran, or you're going to hear about Uyghur Christians in China, but also groups like the Rohingyas from Burma being expelled from Burma. Secondly, we see Christians suffer because of their Christian witness and testimony. Now, fundamental to a Christian life is the call to share the gospel with family and friends. And Christians understand this activity as a biblical mandate called the Great Commission, which we find in Matthew 28:16-20, where Jesus tells his disciples to go into the world, all the world, and to teach and preach the things that Jesus taught and preached, and to make disciples, baptizing them and making disciples, that they would be empowered to make disciples as well. And all of this is to be accomplished in what we call the Great Commandment. And the Great Commandment is to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, but to love our neighbors as ourselves. And so it's a Great Commission call that is done out of love for God and love for people. In evangelism for the Christian, this means sharing the gospel, which often in countries that we're talking about, we see tremendous church growth. We see the Christian community growing. But where Christian community is growing, we also see a backlash of persecution. We see this in an example in India. India, Christians make up 27 million Christians in India, but it only makes up 2.1% of the populations. But Christians in India are visible and open, but churches have been demolished and burned. Worship gatherings have been disrupted. Crosses and graveyards have been vandalized. Bibles and Christian literature have been confiscated and burned, and more pastors are being beaten and put in jail. Christians are often arrested and held up for many weeks, being falsely accused and forcing Hindus to convert to Christianity. And so we see anti-conversion laws rising up in India with and that's looking to be passed through federal law as well. An example in Malaysia, and a Malaysian pastor, Raymond Koh, was abducted from a busy street and has been missing since February 13, 2017. Before his kidnapping, the pastor had been a victim of multiple threats accusing him of preaching and proselytizing to Muslims, and he has been abducted. The third and last aspect that I want to touch on briefly is that Christian converts suffer because they have decided to leave their former religion. So we talked about evangelism. Effective evangelism has resulted in tremendous church growth throughout non-Western nations, which has caused a backlash of persecution against Christian communities. But more often, it's the converts to Christianity that experience more significant human rights abuses. Anti-conversion bills and blasphemy laws are commonly used as a means to discouraging conversions, but also a means to apply pressure on the converts to reconvert to their former religion. And in some cases, in many cases, converts to Christianity are sentenced to lengthy prison sentences as well, and could even face execution for things like blasphemy. In Iran, we see this in Iran. It is illegal to leave Islam in Iran, and those who do face constant threat of imprisonment, falsely being charged of blasphemy or acting against national security. And these Christians also are routinely fired from their jobs, and it is difficult for a known believer to find a new job. And it is also difficult for these convicts they often get evicted from rented homes, and it becomes very difficult for them. Another example would be in Saudi Arabia, where the government often delivers converts of Christianity back to their families, assuming that their families will put pressure on these relatives to convert back to the faith. And sadly, these Christians are more likely to be killed by family members in honor killing than being killed and in prison. Now, I realize that this presentation only scratches the surface of this critical issue, but I hope it's given you a little bit of insight into some of the actual burdens faced by Christians around the world, difficulties that are arising in communist and post-communist nations, and from religious nationalists like we talked about in India, or totalitarian and security states like we're seeing happening in Burma right now, Myanmar, and Islamic extremism, as we see with terrorist groups like Boko Haram or Fulani herdsmen. You know, on the one hand, the Bible teaches that followers of Jesus can expect opposition and persecution in this world because of their identity and faithful witness in Christ. And so we have a theology of suffering. But on the other hand, Christians also believe that God has instituted governments to protect, care for, and administer justice for all people. So where governments fail to protect Christians' rights and the rights and freedoms of other religious groups, we must speak out for the oppressed and call for change. Now, I will close my words with a Bible verse found in Hebrews 13:3, which is a verse that VOM finds its mandate, and it's this: remember those who are in prison as if in prison with them, and those that suffer adversity, as we also are part of the body. And I thank you for your time to share a little bit about the work of VOM and the cause of our persecuted brothers and sisters.
Thank you so much for those wonderful sentiments, Floyd. You know, I really appreciate you mentioning the fact that as human beings, we're all worthy of freedom of belief or religion. You know, these are a part of our constitution as a country, and they should be as a global mandate. And I think that strongly reflects the common denominator's vision. And that's why we're all here today. That's why we're having this event. You know, advocating or, you know, accentuating the message itself is the first step that we feel is needed to actually evoke the universal change that we're all, you know, praying for, striving for. So thank you so much for being here, and I really appreciate your insights. As for our next speaker, we have Babar with us. he was part of an event with TCD in the past, which Amni discussed in prior. And he's done a wonderful job working with the Uyghur Muslims of China and here in Canada as well. So we've gracefully, invited him back, and he's gracefully accepted. So a little bit about him: he was born in Hotan. He's an activist and advocate for his people, found to be deeply personal, and he's found this to be a deeply personal calling. And he's looking forward to working with the campaign for Uyghurs to help his people end the horrific genocide that's being perpetrated in East Turkestan today. So I'm gonna let you take over, Babar. It's really nice seeing you again, and I look forward to hearing from you now.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes, wonderful.
Excellent. So my name is Babar, and I am the program director at Campaign for Uyghurs. I also am an Uyghur, and for those of you who may not know or who don't know too much about it, the Uyghur people are a Turkic, predominantly Muslim group that lives in what the Uyghurs call East Turkestan, but is referred to by the Chinese government as the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. The Uyghur people are distinct. Their culture, their language, their religion, their way of life is very different from the Han Chinese majority of China. And what we're seeing today is nothing less than genocide. What we see today is over 3 million Uyghurs arbitrarily being sent to concentration camps. These concentration camps are designed to assimilate through force the Uyghur people and to eradicate their culture, eradicate my culture. Some of the reasons that could get you sent to one of these concentration camps are reading the Quran, going to Friday prayers, having a beard, or wearing the traditional Uyghur hat, the doppa. These are all innocuous. These are not crimes. They're excuses designed by the regime to systematically eliminate the Uyghur people. In these camps, the primary goal of eradicating the Uyghur people is done through sexual torture, sexual abuse, and systematic rape. We also see brainwashing, propaganda classes. We see physical torture, beatings. We see mental torture. Prisoners are not allowed to sleep. Prisoners are underfed, and prisoners are forced to tell their teachers, tell the guards that they do not worship Allah, or that they are not Muslim, and that in fact their loyalties lie with the Communist Party and with the leader of the Communist Party, Xi Jinping. Outside of that is nothing less oppressive. Mass surveillance, checkpoints at every corner, soldiers on every street. One of the Genocide Convention, signed in 1948 by 153 countries, including China, states that a violation of the Genocide Convention constitutes genocide. And these violations would include the mass killing of a people, the forcible separation of children from their families, the destruction of a way of life, and the attempt to reduce the population and birth rate of a group of people. And we're seeing this today. Mass sterilization has resulted in a significant drop in the Uyghur people's population and birth rate. We're seeing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of children being sent to state-run facilities, orphanages, not unlike the residential schools that were run for First Nations people by Canada and the United States. The United States government has called this a genocide. The Canadian Parliament has recognized it as well. You do not need to be killing millions to be committing a genocide. The destruction of a culture is enough. And the Uyghur ethnicity is closely tied with the Islamic faith. The Islamic faith is being used as an excuse, as a tool by the regime in order to destroy the Uyghur people, and we're seeing that today. My own grandfather and uncles were sent to these concentration camps. My grandfather was sent under the guise of being a religious extremist, an author, an intellectual, and one of our cultures and people's regarded authors. He was in there for months, and shortly afterwards, he passed away. What is happening to the Uyghur people is a genocide, and it is affecting people not just inside of East Turkestan, but the world over, the diaspora of millions of Uyghurs. When I see this happening, I want to share it, and that's why I'm here with you all today. And that's why a couple of years ago, with the Common Denominator, I was working with them to create this event, Proof of Life, that they had mentioned before. And this event was a way for us to educate the campus, students, professors, and more about the realities of what is happening to the Uyghur people. Today, that situation has become significantly worse. It has become unbearable, untenable, and action must be taken. And what I find inspiring is that there are people here today, these speakers, the people who organized this, the Common Denominator, and the people who are watching it, who are looking to learn, looking to engage, and looking to create a better place in this world. And I think that's really what the Common Denominator is all about, by seeing humanity as a whole and not looking at the differences that separate us and attacking those who are different from us. We're human beings, and we all want a better place for our children and our grandchildren. And it is great to be here with these people with this mindset. And I thank you all for inviting me to speak. I wish 10 minutes is a very short time to explain the complexities of what's happening to the Uyghur people, but I hope that you walk away learning something today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Robert. That was extremely emotional. You know, you speaking on your family, and I know that's a lot of personal stuff, but thank you for sharing. If it's any consolation, you know, I don't know if you're watching our YouTube chat, but we're definitely seeing some messages come in that are, you know, saying they're speaking on this, and they're saying that they really appreciate all of you being here and speaking on these. And once again, you know, you mentioned the Common Denominator and our collaboration a few years ago, the Proof of Life event. We're really grateful for that as well. I believe it was a pretty good success. We had quite an audience, and as you said, you know, education, that's the first step. So that's why we're here. And yeah, so thank you again for that. I'd like to invite the next speaker now. So for our next speaker, we have Usman Mahmood. He's an Ahmadi Muslim, an active lawyer who actually specializes in religious, ethnic, and gender-based persecution. Apart from this, he volunteers at the Board of Calgary Legal Guidance, and this offers a wide range of legal services to Albertans. You know, growing up as an Ahmadi Muslim, he has combined his unique experiences with his academic and professional expertise, and now he's a profound activist for those who are marginalized. So that's why we have you here today, and we really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us. But yeah, Usman, I'll let you take over now, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Munib, Danish, and the team at the Most Common Denominator. It's very heartening to see, as Floyd had earlier said, that younger people starting this sort of campaign and starting these type of organizations. That certainly is one of the biggest solutions that we have to the problem that we have, is that we all need to be on the same page. Unless and until we are all on the same page, regardless of our faith, our religious background, our upbringing, our teachings, we all are humans. We all enjoy our peace. We all would love to express ourselves openly, would love to practice our religion, or no religion for that matter, or whatever we believe in or we don't believe in. That is our most common denominator. So I guess I thought I should start with that. However, a practice of a Muslim is to start their anything that they do with obviously thanking the God who has provided us this opportunity. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the Gracious, Ever Merciful. Remember this, the God that Muslims refer to is everyone's God. It's the God of Christians, it's the God of Jews, it's the God of Hindus, God of everyone who believes in God. Today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a very small story. I'm not going to bore you with a lot of things here. Not going to bore you with various legislation and the laws out there that protect people's human rights. But many moons ago, there was a boy, a happy boy. What happened to him certainly changed his life and that life of many others who touched him. When he was 4, his family embarked on a journey to visit the beautiful northern areas of Pakistan. Pakistan has beautiful northern areas, one of the most beautiful landscapes. His grandfather was very fond of him, and he loved his grandfather, as he will listen to his grandfather's stories about how he faced persecution due to his faith in his youth in 1950s and then in 70s in the newly formed country of Pakistan. How his friend's shop was burnt down. Despite of this, his friend stood firm in his faith. Now, back to the story of his journey with his father and grandfather to the mountains. The family stopped over at a mosque which was no longer existing and was merely a pile of rubble. Grandfather told him a story about what happened and why haters destroyed the very mosque that they were standing on. Because the haters did not want the worshippers to pray or practice their faith in that town. This scared that little boy, scared him, and reminded him that not everyone is nice and tolerant like the people that surrounded him. Whilst his tears were trickling down his rosy cheeks, the grandfather was suddenly surrounded by people who were chanting slogans the boy did not understand. 4 years old. Suddenly, those people started pointing towards his grandfather. In no time, the grandfather was in shackles. The boy screamed, cried, as they took his grandfather away. This incident changed the boy's life forever. In case you have not concluded so far, that was myself as that child back in 1986. Many years later, I came to know that my grandfather at that time was criminally charged for practicing his faith and wearing a ring on his finger that had Islamic inscription on it. Pakistani constitution not only prohibits Ahmadi Muslims, the faith my grandfather and I belong to, it criminalizes actions of members belonging to this faith. Even though he passed away in 1993, his criminal case continues in courts in Pakistan. Successive Pakistani governments have failed to protect the human rights and security of Ahmadi Muslims, not just Ahmadi Muslims, but many minorities and other faith groups. As Floyd had earlier mentioned, Christians, Hindus, Baha'is. There's no Jews left in that country. In fact, anyone who does not subscribe to the mainstream faith, they're persecuted. And not only persecuted, unfortunately, the state has failed to protect its citizens in Pakistan. And the reason why I'm just speaking about Pakistan, it does exist in a lot of places, and the persecution is not only limited to Muslims persecuting people of Christian faith or Muslim persecuting other Muslims. This is happening everywhere else. And that is the most scariest part. But there's also hope in there, which is that we all have commonalities. We all have things that we can all agree on. Forget about the disagreement. We've done enough of it. We have fought enough. We have argued enough. it's time for us to sit down together, just like how we are all sitting down together, right? In a virtual world where many things are not possible. However, what is possible is that we all sit down and discuss our pains, share our griefs, and lend out a hand to each other. Try to understand each other instead of getting into this never-ending fight of who's right and who's wrong. The current leader of the spiritual leader of Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat, Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad Ayyadullah bin Aziz, his mission currently, and he continues to carry on that mission, is to bring everyone together on a table and discuss commonalities. He's about 3-4 years ago, he was at the Capitol Hill in the US. He was at the European Parliament, where he warned the world leaders of a very catastrophic end to these conflicts. But he also provided a solution. He not only just shared the griefs and the problems that exist, he also provided a solution. The solution is that we all have to sit down together and we have to provide justice. We cannot be hypocrites about our policies. In one country, our breaches of human rights is acceptable, whereas in some countries it is not allowed. We do not have a blanket rule that if human rights are violated, regardless of how developed a nation is, nevertheless, it's a breach of human rights. We continue to incarcerate small children in the Western world. We continue to deport families who have run away from persecution, faith-based persecution, back to their countries, knowing that they could be a fear to their life. We continue to promote our greed as countries, and because of that, we continue to persecute. The solution that the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat has always provided, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community worldwide, is through their motto, and I'll leave you with that. Love for all, hatred for none. The day we all start believing in that, I think that is the day when we all will be able to see a better future for this world, where all of us, you, me, my children, my grandchildren, your grandchildren, will be able to enjoy a peaceful life where they're open and they're free to practice their faith, religion, their ethnicity, their culture, everything that they bring with them. With a hope for a better future, I'll leave you to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Usman. I love that narrative that you began with. It was quite beautiful. Thank you for being with us here today. Those were some great insights you shared, and that memento you left us with, love for all, hatred for none. I think that's going to resonate with a lot of us, and not just in our faith, but in our daily lives as well. Before we go out to, judge someone or say something against anyone, it's important to remember that, love for all, hatred for none. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was quite beautiful. So for our final speaker today, it's someone I introduced prior. It was Munib Ali. He's currently a medical student at the Cummings School of Medicine, and he belongs to a heavily persecuted minority group. In fact, it's the one that Usman just spoke on, the Ahmadi Muslims. Being that, he's worked with various campaigns and committees in the realm of faith-based advocacy, such as Humanity First. He's as well worked with the Hotchkiss Brain Institute and the Human Performance Laboratory, among others, and he founded the Common Denominator to further accentuate his desire to understand and fulfill what it really means to be human. So, Munib, I'm going to pass it off to you, and let's hear about the Common Denominator's perspective.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Danish. Can everyone, Danish, can we hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great. Perfect volume.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So I'll be conscientious of time here. But of course, good evening, everyone. I wanted to especially thank everyone for joining on a Sunday evening. The weather hasn't been too great in Calgary this past week, and it's decent today. But thank you again for joining us. So we just heard from our respected speakers just before me that whether it's the example of Christians or perhaps the Uyghurs in China, or maybe the Ahmadi Muslims, as Usman had discussed, what often connects these horrific tales is what we call a struggle for being. Consciousness, or our ability to think, really the capacity to believe. It's considered by many, and probably intuitively so, the bridge to reality itself. Our orientation towards something that we like to call meaning, it seems to precede, and I mean even neurophysiologically, it seems to precede everything else and all of our other identity factors. So when we have these conversations, and trust me, there's not enough of these conversations about this struggle to believe or the struggle to be, it's really a conversation about being itself. And what also connects these conversations, and we heard before me, is this reciprocal and even fundamental desire and struggle for a better life, and for a life where we can walk in the markets, we can study in the corridors, or perhaps we can even lead nations without these differences between us. And there might be one identity factor that can really connect us. That's what we like to call the common denominator. The world isn't all rainbows. It's far from it. I'm not here to preach or tell people how to live their lives. But even for a single second, I cannot stay silent when there's an innocent woman or man or child, for the simple sake of their belief, their crisis of being. They're being stripped from their homes. They're having their places of worship burnt to the ground. And they're being murdered, cold blood in the streets. And that's where the common denominator comes in. And I'll go into that in just a second here. So firstly, I wanted to say that let's not for even a second think that this is an issue that, those people in those third world countries need to figure out. And this isn't going to be me standing here and telling you about statistics. I want to address what I just hinted to earlier, that common denominator. The common denominator is our humanity, kinship. And perhaps it's my personal fear that we're losing this idea of kinship day by day. So first of all, my sincerest apologies for my table manners. My name is Munib Ali. I'm the founder of the Common Denominator, and I'm acting as the president this year as well. And when TCD started, a lot of people wondered, why not just start a charity, for example? And charity, it has its place, and rightfully so, but that type of harm reduction strategy is just not going to cut it when people are being literally murdered cold blood in the streets and by governments. It won't stop the bullets from flying. It's not going to stop the churches, the synagogues, the mosques from being burnt down. None of it. But what we can do is take that hate and follow that stream upwards and see what's causing this, and realize that events like this, that the common denominator tries to hold, events with dialogue and an exchange of ideas, is the only way we can make a bottom-up and a true change. We are in a dire need to change people's hearts and minds, to rekindle the flame of humanity. And I'm an Ahmadi Muslim as well, actually, and you heard about them today earlier. And a quote that relates to this, and I'll read off of this from here. that one of the previous heads of our community, Mirza Tahir Ahmed, had said. It's quite beautiful if you listen carefully. Swords, they can win territories, but not hearts. And forces, they can bend heads, but not minds. I'll have you think about that one for a second. And we talk about developing countries, right? And, it's not like we lack the money. We don't lack the resources. What we lack is the ethical standard to distribute these to the folks that are in dire poverty. Any example in name, we're not lacking technology and innovation. We're lacking spirit, kinship, and the spirit to help our fellows in humanity. And kinship, it's an ideal, and it's this feeling similar to what we see in animals. Say a mother and her pups, they might get this natural love that you feel, but for the totality of humanity itself. That's what kinship is. And it does not respect division between religion, race, class, or caste, or any of these perceived boundaries. So my challenge to you today is to write a check, perhaps spending, but I do want to clarify that charity is absolutely great. And it's a great virtuous task. But what I want you to do today is to go home, and I'm certain everyone's tuning in from home. So we've already done the first step. And figure out how we can rekindle this flame of kinship. And I'm going to be talking about this in July, actually. But when you see, let's say, a refugee family in your community, greet them into your community. When you see a sad elderly lady on the bus, have a conversation with her. For too long, we've allowed this inability to show our true human vulnerabilities, our true humanity, and it's impeding us for developing this true spirit that we call the common denominator. And again, like I said, I don't want to sit here and give you a p-value or talk about this in a reductionist way. My goal, our goal as the common denominator, is to hold events like these and remind people, just like Floyd, Baber, and Usman had showed, that what we share is beyond what divides us. And sometimes it's in the nature of happiness, and other times it's just our commonality and our struggle for humanity, the struggle for being. And before I end, I just want to read this quote from David Bohm, respected David Bohm. And he once said that the universe must be thought of as a single, undivided whole. And as a natural extension of that, I would like to end with the common denominator's short little slogan. The common denominator is that we are all human. Thank you. And I'll pass that back to Danish.
Once again, thank you so much for those great insights. You continuously reiterated the kinship and the lack of, or the losing of, the aforementioned kinship. And I think that really speaks strongly on why everyone is here. And, the sentiments displayed by Floyd, Baber, Usman, they kind of resonate that same effect, with the fact that we are, despite being one community, one humanity, we're losing that flame, we're losing that drive, that passion that's supposed to innately unite us all. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you so much for speaking on behalf of the common denominator. It's greatly appreciated. So that ends our speaker session for the evening. Now we're going to transition on to the Q&A session. This is a highly anticipated portion of the event. This is why a lot of the people are here. I'm going to step back now, and I'm going to pass it on to Janice, who's going to be delegating this conversation. So Janice, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Danish. Like you said, we will be starting our Q&A session now. You can text your questions to this number on the screen, 587-997-9808, along with the panelist or executive that your question is directed to. All questions will remain anonymous through this platform, and alternatively, you can also ask questions using the YouTube live chat function, as we have an executive monitoring it. Any and all questions are welcome and appreciated. And then this next slide is just some of our panelists and their names if you needed a reminder. Perfect. So it looks like we have our first question. It is, what is the greatest barrier to our common denominator? It is not really directed at anybody, so anyone can take the stage on this one.
I don't mind going first. This is Usman Mahmood. Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, Usman. We can hear you loud and clear.
Yes, okay. So I think the biggest barrier is our desire to do. As they say it, unless and until we all can get together in events like these, we're not going to reach that stage. So the biggest barrier is ourselves and how selfish as humans we've become. We spend more time in pursuit of happiness, quote unquote, as opposed to finding real happiness, which is really caring for each other.
Thank you, Usman. That was an excellent answer to that question. So we have our next question. It is directed to anyone again, and it is, how do you expect religious persecution to be mitigated in areas which have religious extremists embedded in their political leadership? And again, anybody can take the stage on this one.
Yeah, that's a million-dollar question, isn't it? I think so. If I'm understanding the question right, it's like, how can religious freedom be championed in countries where the government is forming, like there's religious elements in the government that are controlling? Is that the question?
Floyd, so the question, I can just repeat it. How do you expect religious persecution to be mitigated in the areas that have religious extremists embedded within their political leadership?
Okay, yeah, thank you. I get that. I think again, this forum is great for that. We're having a discussion. You're hearing, I think, some real problems in the world today, and I think that advocacy will go a long way. And I think we have the ability in this country, and I think our citizens need to do that more often, is writing their MPs and speaking to our elected officials to put pressure on governments that are, that have those extremist elements that are persecuting religious minorities in those countries. And I don't think that our citizens in Canada engage our politicians enough on these issues. And I think that our politicians then in turn don't engage their colleagues in other countries, their counterparts in other countries on these issues. And I think if there would be a greater advocacy campaign, we might see more pressure from the Canadian government on other governments that are persecuting within their countries.
Thank you, Floyd, for your insight on that. We have another question here. Again, it is directed to anybody. What is the best way to bring awareness to these topics if they're not mentioned on mainstream media?
I could take a crack at that. Just speaking more specifically about the Uyghur cause, because that is what I know best. In terms of not being covered in the media, I find that the issue is that while it is covered in the media, people don't tend to know how to engage properly. And I think that Floyd actually said it best. You know, engagement comes from civic participation, and civic participation comes from the ground up, from individuals and grassroots campaigns working together to let your elected officials know that this is something that matters to you, that this is something that is important and that should be in the political sphere of wherever you are. So in Canada, for example, speaking to your member of parliament, engaging with them on an ongoing basis is one of the crucial ways to get this traction here in Canada first and then internationally. Just as an example with the Uyghur people, as a result of continued engagement within the Canadian Parliament, there is now the Uyghur Canadian Parliamentary Friendship Group, which is headed by Michael Chong, member of Parliament and the shadow foreign minister for the Conservative Party, as well as Samir Zuberi, who's part of the Liberal Party. So you need to be engaging with your politicians, with your elected officials. And while it does sound daunting, all it really takes is sending them a letter or an email and telling them this is something that matters, and making sure that you and the people who care about this issue as well are communicating with each other and regularly following up on these issues and sharing it with other people so that they can also share it with their elected officials. And that's, I think that's an effective way to handle it for all sorts of issues, but that is how it happened for the Uyghurs in particular in Canada.
I think I'll also like to add, Janice, with your permission, that I think what Barbara said is he's hit the nail on the head. But we also need to have these conversations on our dining tables, in our living rooms, with our kids, with our spouses, with our family members, advising them that getting to know our neighbors or people around us, helping them out and getting to know them. As Munib earlier said, if you see a refugee family, now their culture may be different from ours. They may not be able to have an eye contact with us because that's a Canadian way of engaging in a conversation with someone. But in certain countries, that's not how it's done. Forget about other countries. I had a client who was from the Siksika Nation here in the Native Reserve. And the gentleman continued talking to me, and he was looking down. He wasn't looking at me. And I said, well, look, talk to me, look me in the eyes and tell me if this is what you're telling me is true. And he said, look, you're older than me. My culture does not teach me to look into your eyes and talk to you like that. And that reminded me that I come from a very same culture, very similar culture, where when we speak to elders, we don't look into their eyes right away, and that's the way of showing respect. So we got to understand each other's cultures and be tolerant towards it, and try to understand where they're coming from, and then we explain to them how it's done in Canada, and we all can meet halfway. I don't think it's a rocket science there.
Thank you so much, Baber and Osman. That was absolutely a valid point. Policymakers and government officials like to gauge public opinion and see what they find important to better gauge what policies and platforms they should run on. And so now we have another question for TCD. Do you guys operate outside of TCD?
I can hop right on, Janice. It's Sophia. So just in terms of the question, I might need some clarification, but if by the ways of the question, I'm assuming that it means if we kind of do outside of some outside work in terms of volunteerism or contributing to the cause in kind of those ways. Some of our members are part of other communities that are doing some work. I personally do some research work with the Yazidi refugee community here in Calgary. So that also shapes the way that I look at this cause. I think we each bring very unique things to the table, and I think that also contributes to the work that we're doing now. it provides some insight, but also allows us to kind of strive to reach other communities that we may not have contact with. In that regard, if anyone else from TCD wants to chime in, feel free to do so.
Sure. Yeah, I can chime in. So yeah, Sophie basically got it. I think the main way is we're trying to reach to external communities. I mean, these are not communities that you'll find technically represented at the university. And I think it's really important for us to expose campus to, so, like for example, when we held Proof of Life with Babar, and Amni and both Babar had mentioned that event. I think it was a great way. We got a lot of feedback after, the students going like, we don't see this type of stuff on campus, and I would say that that's precisely correct. And I think relative to the scale that religious persecution has on a global level, there's like relative to that, there's a pretty blackout silence on campus about faith, and particularly on on the basis of persecution. It's not really something you get talk about. And I would say that as you move up in your professional career, it gets even tougher to talk about. So that's an issue that we've been trying to bridge with reaching out to communities and holding these events on campus. As far as operating outside of campus, we have a lot more plans for expansion for that. But currently we are registered with the University of Calgary.
Thank you so much for that. And while we are on you right now, Maniv, there is a question for you. What changes have you seen in the conversation regarding these issues since the beginning of the common denominator?
Okay, yikes, that's a tough one. We started it's been a year and a half to 2 years ago. And the first year we started was that event. So I don't mean to repeat my answer from the previous one, but I think that the predominant feeling that I get is students that have been seeking these types of forums come to us, and they either will join us as volunteers or join our executive team, or they'll mention that these types of issues are happening. And I've actually had some students mention to me that they're more interested in going into, for example, working with the UN or doing XYZ. And as far as I'm concerned, that's about as positive feedback as we can get, that we've motivated someone to go into human rights law. Like we'll make another Usman, for example. And that would be amazing if we could even just do that. As far as campus, our club's been growing. We've been increasing our social media outreach as well. And it's just been positive reception. Unless we were looking for anything specific for that answer. That's all I have to say for that.
Thank you, Maniv. The next question is directed to Usman. Has the UN failed the rights of those persecuted?
Well, it's a very tough question because it's hard to say. Look, Barbara spoke about the Geneva Convention. It's certainly started a conversation, but what United Nations looks like currently, it's a bit of a sad story. And as you can all see, I mean, United Nations is controlled by some major funders that come from the countries that do a lot of these human rights violations. We've seen in the last few years, the previous administration in the United States was breaking human rights pacts that they have with other countries, left, right, and center. Not to mention the environmental treaties that they got out of and all that. But certainly, United Nations in its current form is not sustainable unless, again, going back to my point in my presentation, justice prevails. Unless and until that's done, it's an uphill task for sure.
Thank you so much, Usman. Now we have a question for Babar. One of the things that is interesting is many in the US act like they care about the genocide. However, many of the entertainment we watch in a way endorses many of the things going wrong in China. Take the NBA, for example, and the controversy with LeBron James, one of the biggest athletes, who encourages athletes to be political, but is fine with the NBA in China and his personal athletic deals with manufacturers in China. He even had some comments on the Hong Kong issue, which was controversial. What do you make of this apathy that the public have towards actively putting money into these industries and such?
Yeah, that is it's a big question for sure, and I think you can categorize it under the umbrella of performative activism, the idea of being a vocal or visible signal, but not following through on your actions or what you've been saying. And I think that the NBA rightly gets that kind of criticism, and I think that companies like Nike rightly get that kind of criticism as well. And a really relevant topic actually that happened this week is on Thursday, the Communist Party had, in a way, announced, a boycott of companies that had pledged to stop using cotton that was sourced from the Uyghur region. And the reason they did that is because it's all, usually most of it at least, is made sourced from forced labor, from Uyghurs. So companies had put up statements about Xinjiang cotton, about Uyghur forced labor, and the netizens of China on this platform similar to Twitter called Weibo had started to speak about how these companies want to stop buying cotton from the Uyghur region, but they want to still sell their cotton in China. So as a result, a lot of companies folded. The Hugo Boss was one of these companies, and apparently it was an unauthorized comment, but they had initially stated that they are proud to continue using Xinjiang cotton and will always do so. Companies like Fila had done it. Inditex, Zara's parent company, took down their statement about forced labor and Xinjiang cotton. So we can see that there's an enormous amount of pressure that comes economically from wanting to access the market in China and from wanting to continue having access to cheap manufacturing and cheap material sourcing that is built on the backs of slave labor. It's a very, very complicated topic, and there are a lot of reasons why people aren't talking about it. But the reality is that it's complicity in the comfort of cheap goods and entertainment, while the true atrocities of what it takes to make these products, what it takes to stay entertained and have access to cheap clothing, stays hidden in the background. So there's a lot of complex factors, but it comes down to companies that are complicit and consumers that are willing to stay quiet about it.
Thank you so much, Bobber, for shedding light on that. The next question is for Floyd. How has the landscape changed for Christians in the world over the last few decades?
Yeah, it's interesting conversation. I think that, when Voice of the Martyr started back in the late 60s and 70s, it was primarily focused on Christians in communist countries. And in communist countries, Christians and other religious groups, not only Christians. I mean, our founder, Reverend Richard Wurmbrand, and his wife both spent time in a concentration camp, and they were in camps with Muslims and Hindus that were thrown in prison with them. And so, our focus being on Christian, we focused on communist countries. And then as the world began to change and communism began to crumble in parts of the world, we started hearing of other areas where Christians are suffering persecution, and we see trends. Things seem to get better. There seems to, things get better in certain regions for a while, and then we certainly saw that with China, where I would never say that Christians were out of the woods when it came to persecution in China, but particularly when communism first came in and under Boxer Rebellion and into the 70s. I mean, there was Christians were constantly, house church leaders were thrown in prison, and Many of them died in these camps. And then there seemed to be a bit of a shift, and there seemed to be some freedoms and at least some relaxing of the agenda against Christians. And now we see again under this regime, there's a backlash against the church again, probably about as strong as it was when communists first came in. So we see a war against the church. We see a war against the cross, symbols of the cross. So crosses are being torn down from buildings. And the picture of we see, for example, the Bible being translated and changed by the communist government to add other elements in that so that they don't have a pure Bible. So there is a clear agenda against Christians. And we certainly see that with, as we heard with Barbara as well, with the Uyghurs, and there's similar agendas going on. So we see this played out in different regions, and certainly, it's hard when you're looking at a global Christianity, and you'd have to look at specific pockets where trends change and things get difficult. We see in India backlash of Christianity. We see. We saw what happened when ISIS came in, moving through and destroying old Christian relics, but also, again, then Muslims were caught in that conflict as well. Nigeria, where probably more Christian blood has been shed in the last few years than any other country in the world. So we see those hot spots begin to form, and then other spots begin to change a little bit again. So yeah, there's an ebb and flow, I would say, to a lot of it, but I wouldn't say that things have gotten better. Unfortunately, I think things in some ways have gotten worse, and we see, then other religious minorities thrown into the mix as well, facing difficulty and persecution. And this is where, again, we talked about working together and trying to find ways of commonality and living in harmony. But it continues to be a challenge.
Thank you so much, Floyd. And another question for Usman. Why did you want to practice in refugee law?
Yes, again, I think the story about my childhood, obviously children go through experiences, and I was lucky that that experience did not bog me down where I lost the sight of what should be done. I think a lot of credit goes to my parents, a lot of people who influenced me in doing something that would help some other people out as well. I mean, it was just last week I was in a refugee hearing where a Hindu refugee claimant from Pakistan was fighting his case, and it was very emotional towards the end when you see people trying to explain their stories and their persecution. And it's so interesting that in those 2 or 3 hours where they're in front of a refugee board, immigration refugee board, narrating their stories, how do you explain to someone as to what you and your family have experienced in terms of persecution? Persecution cannot be put into words; it has to be experienced. So many of us who are here sort of come from that background where we have directly or indirectly experienced it. So I think that was my biggest motivation, and I'm very happy that I am honored and I'm humbled to be doing something where I'm able to make some difference in people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Usman, for sharing that personal sentiment. Our next question is for TCD. How do we educate people that religious extremists do not represent the religion as a whole?
Thank you, Janice, for the question. That's also a very tricky question, but I'll take a stab at it. Yeah, that's a big issue, right? Because there's a lot of individuals due to the lack of knowledge or ignorance, whatever you want to kind of label it as, often can kind of see extremists of various groups as representatives of the religions that they follow. But I believe that it's through kind of reaching out and creating kind of positive interactions or even events like these, and not just kind of targeting those that are kind of present in these spaces, but those that may be looking for opportunities to engage with individuals of these groups who actually do represent the religions or the faith groups that they're part of. I believe education is kind of the key, right? And if we can kind of, it's a tough one, but reach out in ways to kind of not change the mind of those that believe these things, but provide them with, positive interactions and insights that we can kind of construct these false narratives that are often kind of portrayed in media and other forms of communication. Yeah, if anyone else from TCD wants to chime in, feel free to do so.
Sure. Yeah, I can give a stab at that question as well. So I believe from just things that I've seen around me, interactions with other people, that the most important thing in bridging that gap and overcoming certain stereotypes is to have conversations and kind of create a community that's very involving of everyone. I think we mentioned this before, the aspect of kinship and reaching out to people within your community that are struggling and that may be different to yourselves, but remembering that the commonality is in fact that we are all human, and reaching out on the basis of that. I hope that answers the question somewhat.
I'm gonna quickly jump in on this as well. I'll say just a couple of sentences to add on to what Sophia and Jesse had mentioned. I think there's also a practical approach too for those people who assume that a religious group can be substantiated by a small group of the extremists within it. Take a look around and just look at our community. It's very common to have a Muslim neurosurgeon that saves your family from a close to end stage cancer. It might be people that are working in healthcare, education, in your neighborhood, people who smile at you in the streets, respective of your faith. I think it's very important to just look around you and see that a lot really connects us. I don't want to drag us over time. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you everyone for your questions. This is incredible and we truly appreciate the engagement. Unfortunately, in the interest of time, we will need to wrap up our Q&A session, but please feel free to reach out to us via our social media or email on the screen right here, and we will be more than happy to relay your questions to our wonderful speakers or answer it ourselves. I will now be passing this on to Carl, who will be giving our closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Janice. So that concludes our event for today. Thank you all for the viewers that came today. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you to my fellow TCD members that put their utmost efforts and putting such a great event. Also, and last but not least, thank you so much for all the speakers that came today. Thank you so much for investing your time with us. And you guys were the biggest part of the event today. We wouldn't be here without you guys. So thank you so much.
Okay, have a great day, everyone.